What's cooking, folks? Vermillion Phoenix here, and today we are jumping into some more Orcs Must Die 3. This time we are heading into close quarters. This is the 7th scenario in the Old Friends campaign, and this is also going to be the first level that you get after you finish your first war scenario. So it's probably going to be a bit jarring with the change in how everything gets set up, but in Riftlord, this level is actually a little bit difficult with the initial setup, mainly because you're going to be dealing with a lot of heavy enemies in the first couple of rounds, and those rounds are probably going to be the most difficult to actually get through without losing some rift points. Once you can get the areas sort of conjoined, it'll be a lot easier, but I'm going to show you the way that I do it, which is a little tricky on its own, but seems to work pretty well for me. And it includes combining the two lanes together so that you really only have to deal with one of them as time goes on. So I'm taking fire arrow walls in the beginning, and those are being placed along this side to mainly deal with the heavy ogres that are coming through, because like I said, a lot of heavy enemies, and these traps will basically almost one-shot the heavy units on their own. The trolls are weak against them. The ogres take a lot of damage from them. It's just good overall. Fire traps are amazing in this game, this particular iteration of Orcs Must Die, and so I recommend, unless you're dealing with a heavy fire fiend level, you should probably take them. That said, you're going to be dealing with so many heavy enemies that even spamming arrow walls initially won't really clear you, and you're going to have to focus on getting a lot of headshots in the first wave or so to make sure that you're clearing the heavy enemies. The lighter enemies aren't too much of a problem as long as you can kill them quickly. They can't maintain a lot of health from most weapons, so as long as they die from a headshot or from rapid fire without getting healed by the healers that they send out as well, you really shouldn't have too much of an issue. But if you do not kill the heavy enemies quickly, or they happen to have a sliver of health left, they will get healed by the healers, and that basically makes everything worse for you because that wastes the damage of both your character and your traps. What you'll have to try to do is at the end of the first wave, sell the initial traps that you set up so that you can start to build something a bit more substantial. Now, I like to use grinders around this corner here, but what I found is that grinders will work very well for dealing with the runners, but they don't work too well against the larger enemies, and the larger enemies are really what we're worried about. So we're going to focus primarily on traps that deal elemental damage, and I had to get rid of the grinders because of it. By doubling up the arrow walls will hit enemies both on the left side and the right side walls, and there's a decent enough range on that right side that you can hit pretty much everything that happens to still be there. So using a mix of tar and brimstone is actually pretty good there. I don't have the fire boost on the tar here. I still have the slow, so that I don't have to just spam tar 100%. I still want to make sure that we have some traps in there that are able to knock out the runners when they get too close, and that's super important because there's a lot of kobolds here, and without that, and without both the brimstone and grinders, you would have to pay a lot of attention to kobolds, and that will require bringing something like fire bracers or just another kobold solution, and yeah, I don't like doing that. Like, kobolds are annoying enough, and if you don't have a trap that's guaranteed to take them out, you do have to pay a lot more attention. One of the big issues that you'll see with this playthrough in general and this level is that there's a lot of archers. They send archers out there to pester you the entire time, and if you are not bringing the healing trinket, you're going to need some way to make sure that you get healed quickly. I'm making a lot of use of quick selling here during the 3 seconds that you get between waves, and this is really hard to do in Riftlord because that's all the time you'll get. That said, I'm trying to use the bare minimum of barricades here to make sure that we get these lanes joined, and that's super important because literally any more coin necessary, and I wouldn't have been able to join the two lanes there, and that would have made sure that I had to deal with essentially handling both lanes at the same time. The waves are staggered a little bit, but at some point you're going to be dealing with enemies coming from both sides because you just don't have enough DPS. You could try to make sure that you have traps on both sides of the lanes here. It's more like trying to put traps on both sides of the little acid river. Because it's a lethal point. If you fall into it, you just die. You can try to knock enemies into it, but that's a little finicky. So I'd rather just make sure we deal with them primarily just with flat damage. So joining the lanes basically gives you only 1 point for the enemies to exit from, which makes it a lot harder for you to miss enemies, especially since there are earth elementals on this level. And the tricky thing with them is always that they're going to break down into smaller minions every time you kill them. The Earth Lord, if you get those, will break down into 2 Earth Elementals. The Earth Elementals will break down into 2 Earth Runners or Earthlings. They're just annoying. So now that we have a basic defense up to make sure that not too much is coming through on the left side, I'll place another fire arrow wall there. And these arrow walls are basically going to be dealing the biggest chunks of damage at a time to the enemies that are coming through. It's a good idea to get that Brimstone there placed a little bit sooner, just to make sure that the runners die before tripping all of your arrow walls. It's okay if they trip a couple of them, but you don't want them to be running clear through all of the trap setup and basically disarming all of your traps before you actually get a chance to deal any serious damage. That'll give the enemies that come in right behind them a super big advantage on getting through things. And once you get a few arrow walls up, it actually becomes very difficult for anything other than runners to get through. And so because we have the Brimstones in and the arrow walls, a lot of enemies tend to get taken down really easily, and you can just clean up the rest with a mix of Blunderbuss fire and the ice amulet. So not too bad afterwards. And you can see now that everything's kind of joined and we have a mix of traps flying around, we have a lot less enemies actually getting close to the rift. And from here, you'll see that there's a lot more gnolls coming through. The gnolls are there to sort of make sure that you can't focus directly on the lanes, and that's why it's important to join them, because normally where you try to focus your character on dealing additional damage to the enemies as they come across the 2 different areas, if they force you to focus your attention elsewhere or slow you down, that could prevent you from being able to do what you need to do. So blocking all the enemies into only having a single entry point for your rift gets rid of all of the complications that they can really add for you, in addition to just being able to kill them really quickly. The majority of the damage for enemies that are able to pass a long period of time around this area is going to be your auto ballista. The auto ballista are super good at taking out the heavier enemies, especially when there's a large group of them, because while the arrow walls do a lot of damage, they won't necessarily take out all of the heavy enemies if they're grouped up. So a couple of arrow walls and a lot of ballista will make sure that they take a lot of damage, the heavy enemies specifically, as they're getting close to the traps, and then they'll likely get finished off or shot again as they go around corners or just get closer to the nest of auto ballista. So this really is a solid trap setup for me once you get past the first wave or 2. Like, it's that quick instance of selling to get to the point where you can place the barricades that's really important for like the first 2 waves. After that, it's a cakewalk. And you can see I'm almost not paying that much attention to the right side around this wave now, because there's so much trap damage happening with the auto ballista and the arrow walls that there's not much else for me to do. And the ballista and the brimstone are both increasing the damage that the firewalls are doing. So, boosted firewall damage is good, especially since, or boosted fire arrow walls, because the arrow walls already do a ton of damage on their own. And that just makes sure that they can pretty much one-shot just about anything. Now, I've tried using some other traps in this setup, and things that might seem good might actually wind up hurting you in the long run. Like the ice arrow dart, the ice dart spitter. I don't know why I called it an arrow dart. But the ice, if you use a dart spitter with ice upgrade, it'll slow enemies down in areas where they might not be able to take damage. And you can consider that a trap that replaces an auto ballista, which means that it'll be slowing enemies down. They don't deal a lot of damage on their own because they don't spray that many darts. And even if the darts do decent damage on the chance that they hit enemies, because they don't fire fast enough to take enemies out on their own, they're probably not going to wind up clearing, and that's a problem. Because there's limited areas where you can actually place them where they're going to be able to catch all of the enemies at once, that also creates a problem for you. And you would have to get rid of something else here as well. You can see that the ice dart spitter is in my loadout, but I intentionally choose not to use it, specifically to save on par time here. And par time with any sort of crowd control on this map is going to be a bit difficult. I'm using almost no crowd control up until the point where enemies actually cross in front of this last fire arrow wall area. And I'm trying to place more traps that cover areas before the enemies get to the traps via the auto ballista, which is another reason the ballista is super important. Like, in addition to being able to fire at a wide range, they also are able to pepper enemies before they actually get to your more concentrated kill box areas. And because of the fact that, like, there's not a huge amount of useful ceiling all over the place here, or I should say there's not a lot of ceiling places where you want to put traps that aren't close to your traps because of the lack of crowd control and everything else going on here. Auto Ballista is just a good choice. I mean, one of the things that Orcs Must Die 3 could probably use is a bit more variety in the ceiling traps. Like, while the ceiling traps are good, some traps cost way too much money. And then, like, they're extremely powerful when they're useful, but they're not universally useful. So, the Auto Ballista really has this niche where it's just not always the exact best trap to have, but it's almost always useful. And it tends to get used a lot because of that. It's not that the other traps are weak, because the Ice Dart Spitter in some other situations would be an amazing trap. It's probably just that the par time here is a little tight, and it should almost be over at this point, but that Ogre charge always amazes me. Just because it looks hilarious. They're charging and then they just start sidestepping while running at you. It's like they're mad, but they can't do anything about it. But yeah, like, there's less than like a minute left when the stage finishes. And if you consider like the CC that would have happened automatically with any other crowd control traps, whether that be the ice on the dart spitter, ice on saws, or any other trap that would hold enemies for a long period of time, that would be an issue. And this is definitely a situation where seconds per wave actually are an issue. Because you can see if I lost 5 seconds on every wave, then I would have lost the par there. But either way, that setup worked really well for me. The trickiest thing there is definitely the barricades in the beginning. After wave 2, because you have to make sure you've sold everything to really have the money, or you have to do better combos. Better combos can help you out there a bit, but even so, they'll only go so far. But either way, let me know what you guys thought of this clear. Do you have a better way to do it? Is there a trap that you prefer on this stage? Let me know in the comments. Also, feel free, if you haven't so far, to check me out on Twitch. I stream there a bit more often than I get to post videos lately just because it doesn't require quite as much preparation, editing and all that other stuff, but I'm still going to get videos over here. I'm going to use that to kind of start doing more reviews of indie titles and things like that, which is great. And you should see those coming sometime in the near future. I don't want to promise anything specific, but that's what I'm working on in the background while I'm doing these sort of level walkthroughs. But let me know how you guys are doing. And as always, until the next video or until you catch me on stream again, please take care of yourselves. That's one of the most important things we can do these days. And as always, have a good one, folks. Take it easy. Peace.